우리다 쇼미다 바스리 담보고 쇼디 마삼나 남베 쇼에네 고 기와치마 펜제 된다지 삼을 당겨라 어디 인데 고 천디치부 많이 봐 기와치마 펜제 된다 삼을 당고도 치와딩에 봐도 삼고도 치와 삼을 당노 게 봐도 치그리 친인도 사카레스네 도아리 주다한테네 다르바다 식된데 삼을 당겨라 어디지고 치와 삼을 당 되네 겨왕같이디 예바 삼을 코스나 하시네 쭉 신데디 용도
Right. So the purpose of Boto has said the path to generating insights is blocked until an awareness of death and impermanence has arisen in the mind. How do we know if this awareness has arisen? Is there any way to measure it? So then the purpose of cultivating an awareness of death and impermanence is so that to lessen our preoccupation or interest in things of this life, and to become interested in future life, and so then as we cultivate the awareness of death and impermanence, we'll become more interested in what's going to happen to us after our death, the process of getting there and thinking about the future lives and past lives, and then bringing to mind the practices of of creating the causes for fortunate human rebirth and liberation and so forth. These kinds of concerns become more prevalent.
Yeah. What did you show in that? You bring in a nature casora. Kiatoma Meva, Nature, Yankee, Yanshi, Drogobatelia, Rana Rawan Meva. 풍분도 레전이 기지 제고 같을 동해지랑 신도 통에 텔레 탈바치 뒤에는 제고도 상겨라. 저 연구도. 되네지 기부 첨부를 지배이나야. 개월 동만에 천디자 말에 교황아마에 밤마다 년에도 된대요. 교화심을 된대 연구를 삼대. 개월 동만에도 기실을 동만에도 년에도 다 밤말이야. 밤마다 삼을 거고도. 그래서 그 신의 교환도 순도해야 돼. 삼로코나마도 최고라 기부 충분히 전부 관계야. 최고 신뢰부터 수사면도.
That's more describes how the person at the initial level of spiritual development would react to the cultivation of an awareness of death and impermanence, but for someone who's at the intermediate level of spiritual development, then they would be thinking about how, after having developed an awareness of death and impermanence, thoughts about how to escape from the bonds of karma and the afflictions, and how to attain liberation. Those kinds of thoughts would be more prevalent. And then for a person who's reached the advanced or highest level of spiritual development, then they would be thinking about all living beings, not just yourself, but since beginningless time, all beings have been reborn as our relatives, and therefore they're just like me, and that if they are suffering, I have to release them from their suffering. And so concern for others and thoughts of concern for others, what do you say, freedom from suffering, become prevalent. So then that means that developing an awareness of death and impermanence is important for anyone, regardless of what level of spiritual development they've reached.
Oh yeah, that don't karina mana. Wo chu samlutandi de sendele tendu tenge mewa. Shini chima drone de tu sinyango ba de samlu ko godwa.
So then what you're thinking at that point is then that you're going to have to be constantly dying and being reborn.
Then go chua medaba tagba is someday. I could do in a corner chivers and on Ashingi and Samsangi. Nobody in Gurmado pay the Zig Samluti Shidatangamarwa. Chu Yamdus Samluti Nangiki Ungura Nimero or Tashingi some Ina Kochi Tandamashia would have some because it's on Ashingi. David Castor Lomekiva, Chingi, some Sakaduna, Samluti Yona, and Chua Medawa Tangiora. Or Tina, Chima Penji, Cinema Sendiliaco, Nishu Tombata. Chamba Sawa, Shana Sawa Payakanga, Shuchurndura.
And then also that our because we're constantly thinking about death and impermanence, then what happens is that we start to think, oh, I'm going to die. So then we're very aware. We become very aware that we're going to die, and we're not looking very much at the things of this life, and we're considering the future life. But in this life, then we also make good use of the time we have here and develop love, compassion, and other virtuous states of mind.
No, that did it. Tondako, Niji, Nako, Shandas, and Rogay, Kaduna, Nadil, and Rogo, Samna, and then Drag Chetu Kevelagadi, Kaduna Chedera, or dinner she done Chu, and the Chiva Chonsi, Nichua, Tembutan, Tangang, Chomizina, and Kuchima Penjik and Mangichinduyora. What you said to the shake.
So then it's just like if we were going to leave for some distant destination, and we would start preparing ourselves, packing up and taking care of our responsibilities and so forth before we left. So then that's what happens when we have this idea, oh, I'm going to die, and then we are concerned with being prepared for that event.
Yeah, I think I
that's a dating Shina, dating Shina. That's a because a dredging yabo majene dating Shina. Then it shiwe kalamo la kari jengore dating Shina. Oh, what go? Geshe, if we die today and being unprepared, what should we remember or do at the very time of our death?
Oh, and it's Joachima. Had the middle of I was getting tree, I was to a young show something. What did this sometimes? I'm just sure because you know, Jambuda, Chanju Semda, Chamba, and Yingji the Kanga Comera.
So our usual practice is to think about love, compassion, after having taken refuge in the three jewels. So at that point we should think about those kinds of virtuous states of mind, and also bring to mind that we've collected a lot of non-virtue in our beginningless former lives, and then confess those, and just to keep our minds then focused on a kind of aspirational prayer, to be able, I guess we call it an aspirational prayer, just to make I don't know, yeah, well, we'll call it that, an aspiration to practice the teachings again in my next lifetime. You think like that?
No, tenda ko kiwe samlo, kiya chen mi kiwe samlo da chik yime de da chakdang da tende samlo mayo tabshi so che kiwe samlo ngane chitu beina ne ko la da mi da nge son me che che yora. So the lamul mission da ina kondu mayo ko na kar samne dina shin che che ko kondu da chi samba mi yo me tabshi che yora. Okay, samlo ngane shi tabshi che yora ta tenda.
So essentially what we should do at that time is to do whatever we can to not have any kind of non-virtuous thoughts and attitudes at that time, and to think of virtuous thoughts as much as we can, to direct our mind towards virtue and not get anxious and fearful and so forth, but to direct our minds towards virtue. So then it's good just to take refuge in the three jewels and say and sort of aspire. You can think of it as saying, may I, but I will attain a life in my next lifetime that is conducive to practicing the teachings again. The double young Shendachi Yore. Shenda, there's a Sem Shiba Jene Shiva la Gandres Ngata Michi Shi Drogi Yena Dene Ngata Kola Gandres Rokche Gorde Ko Sem Shiva Surba la Gandres Sem Shiva Sur Tugide, the some Shiva Sana called then they gonna cancel it. How can we help others so they can die peacefully? Send out like Andres Roche Gorde. Because Yapujene Shia like Andres Roche Gorde.
Depending on Zulaiba, now be sure to Chico, Chicken and Chulukari Nerva, or the Chug Cordo, Ya Tambakieta. And Nico Shingere Salamna, Jibaki and Ko Miji Shingage Dona, can I sugar yes Lakumarva? I could show you somebody and get a Amjiga Lapsar Koran, touch everything day, or Takera. Kunjul soya wata kachik marisache kondu mayo da korang deba kadu ne tin shiche sem hadu ya tapshi chigura che kola chulu karne ti temper kia tostos in the Hako Cabina, temper such you near. Any sem Kona Karalamna, Nijaco, sem Hadria Chegura.
So it's not good to tell somebody they're going to die if it's going to disturb their mind and they're going to get very fearful. But if it's just decided that now they're going to die and you can help them then prepare for that death by helping them to recall, to remember whatever religious practice they might have, whatever religious system they might follow. Just help them to remember their religion, their Dharma practice in our case, but whatever religion they happen to have, and then do whatever you can to help their make it so that their mind stays peaceful, that they're not stirred up by anything.
That's right. That and Dako, some two Nichi Kizandamanda Kishebe Kabrishine, Kizandamanda Shen Yoda Sheshuduna, Tatan de Kiran, in the Samlamata, Kiran Nazia, Gavata, Pengit, Tana Nugre, Samba Shivashite, Tazulega Chemakalicha or the Sachilam Naura.
Well, for instance, if somebody's getting all disturbed and worried, and thinking many different things and talking about a lot of different things, you reassure them, saying, "Oh, don't worry now. You're taking, using good medicine. You have plenty of help. You're going to be all right." Try to calm them down that way. Yeah. So doing things like that then should help them.
Shinge Korang Samlu Tangjo de Hakone Chagora. Shinge Korang Samlu Chuluda Chikarina Samlu Tanja Samlu Tereshiorva. The end of the gente
So you really have to consider what kind of spiritual practice, I mean, if they don't follow religion and at all, what kind of spiritual practice is calming to them, and speak to them about that, and just according to what calms their mind down. Shine, why would a god be? Until Lada mi Gopang Thabkhe, because I gave a chung some Gyorwa. In Slala Gena, they pengi the bed, they nugi my the bed, Slala Gena, then it because lay sangbo mambo. Because a trolla dangi over the bed, then Fala Gede, then it bit keep it down, then because lay sambo mambo trolla drogede, then it's young she go there, young Miles Long go there, Fala in the pengi in some good could then it carried in a Fala. Why would a god be a fortunate rebirth since karma gets exhausted and we end up back in lower realms of existence, and it would seem that we would be wasting our merit and not creating more as a god. Young Sunam Kaza Lala Gene did Sunam did Ke Kapores.
Sunam Ke Kapores. Sunam Zodu says.
So Kapores. Because Lala Gene, then it's Sunam Sak Kapore.
Oh, Cherbe. Yeah. Padiko Lala Ches, Lala Mambuyara. Sumiji Lasser, Sungambe Lasser, Yora. The Sudangarazu, some danger, things is in top loud on top and then debe ne lu lonju kangal shinja da te and then ha some de tambo da ni ba la le ke go some something you wish to say to what I think is tempo to me to ke yo mara de le ke mare ba ke sa den don kan bela se jora ngara zo to ya ta ga che de la to se ora o de zo le ke yo ra o de zo le ke ba ina ko nyawa yo da tendo le ke bale me sangre mele la sangre ke ve chane sangara ke wa sangbore ane chi te yende ko ke na ne so le ke bala la le ke ya gra mele la ke wa sangara wa o dire
then there are different types of gods. There's the form and the formless gods. If you, in order to be reborn into those, into life as a god in those realms, then it's one has to attain an approaching to meditative stabilization, and it's a high meditative state, and then one engages in insight, where you are thinking about the unattractive qualities of lower realms and the attractive qualities of the higher realms, and so then we're not really talking about that kind of attainment as any of those two gods, or gods in any of those two realms. We're really talking about rebirth into a god in the desire realm, and so rebirth as a god in the desire realm is certainly more desirable than being reborn into the miserable realms.
No, de ko la le ke na de ve la ra ke na chue sung ye yo ra chue nye yo ra ne kya wa chamba ngo be kan de la ri ne kya wa chamba ngo be chue sung se ra o de ne shi sum ji zo sum be la ri chi na ko de chue nye yo re ane tsam le sanje ke tuji wange shin lungi ko ale tene chuen do se ke do ane la nga wo chi le chuen do se ke do tin de koran zo shin da nga chen bu sho tele tene de je me da ba da sa je dung la nam le yeng ne pe yeng de le shu lu ku ma chi ta to yong go ara sanje ke chin ji la pe ka yong go ara tin de ko min ne shin ke kyo bo da chi be ke ba chi tin de 동해 숙천부터 소리가 말아. 이런 남이 숙천부 요할때 이나 참참라 그 교망부사들에서 산지에 두지왕게 취지자 돼야 요라 취생계 연구하라. 어떤데? 그래.
So in those realms, then it's possible for us to be reborn into a situation where we could receive teachings, like to be reborn into the realm where the future Buddha, Maitreya, resides, or to be reborn into one of as a god or a deity of the heaven of the 33. And then also there's a number of sutras that are where the Buddha is teaching a god of the gods of certain realms or certain deities anyway, and so those deities have a certain, accumulation of merit that makes that possible for a Buddha then to appear to them and sort of cut through their distraction. The life as a god, they don't have the kind of difficulties and suffering that we go through, but they do have the difficulties of being very distracted. So through a Buddha has a certain ability then to cut through that and allow it, give some desire realm gods the opportunity to hear the teachings.
It's
a kind of you can think of we use the word blessing, but maybe it's more like empowering, something empowering the deities to be able to listen to the teachings. There's certain sutras are even named that way.
무슨 제면에 진질라베 가시기도 하나우치 저 텔레텔 삼장을 다 줘요 거 그러면서 고기요래
다치 용기도
최지다
최기다
고기요래
so it's like it's not that the Buddha appears to him in person, but that there's a kind of I don't know, a sound, maybe you can say, the voice of the Buddha, or there's some sound of the teaching appears. They're hearing the sound of the teaching. Yeah, they're just hearing the teachings. It's just, then just sometimes it's like based on the wind blowing, that you hear the teachings, the sound of the teachings, and so it's not like it has to be spoken from vocal cords. It's the wind itself speaks the teaching, so you can think of it that way.
Jambada Zawada Tinde Comgana, meeting Yagaris. How does go Malam Jaguar, Kiran Dawaj, Zambuling Miliki, Curtis Milikianaco, Tobacco Yanin de Kanga, you do Yang Kanga Tundi, Jambada Ninja Zawada, Koala, the Kanga, Kecho Yore. Nogdamangu, I thought some Daga and then Yogda or Yawoman do some teacher, and Yogda Toya Manatoya keep shut.
So then there, but in general, it's therefore a better life to be than being reborn as an animal, hungry ghost, or a hell being, certainly. But at the time of their death, then if they have some inclination to the teachings, then that time they make an aspiration to be reborn as a human, where they're very aware that humans undergo suffering. In the God realms, or the deity realms, then they don't have. They have very subtle, very slight suffering, but just if they, based on that, they have an understanding that, if I was born as a human, then having that kind of suffering would be a great opportunity to practice the teachings. Then there's some, what do you say, some basis for them being reborn as humans and being able to practice the teachings, and. But if then they don't have that inclination at all, then they just undergo suffering and at the time of the death and die without that consideration at all. What's a Deng Sang? Kimba Yin, because Deng Sanki kind of say Rikshung Saba la de Mangche wa Kimba de then Jetsang because Rapche Dambo de la Naxel la Drogo de Dikor la then because Kimberley Junga Korlachi Shaggy or what? Then it not to countries indeed not to the Dunda Kari or the Kimberley, then for those of us who live with our families and in the modern world, how should we interpret going to the forest or, quote, separating from home and family?
Yendo yi tekba range yi tekba sendo. Sangale ina ko rimba mangudwa. No di indo. Soso kare le meba yone tiche ora mado. Songshaba sangmade nganzu cheto marwa. Pene kibu chimbe cheshidu takbe shenche bache ora se. Di dondali ani chimba chudin sweba janja zongore songyora. Di nganzu kanga chanto marwa. Ine o di yabore sam. Di meyul shange tende cheto bache ora samgurwa. Ani kibu dingda jine chakdan chi yuwa mara nganzu da khonzu se yuwa mara. Simjen kanga chigbari tewandule dunga mendoba chigbari songyora. Ani nganzu da khonzu meba chigba nganzu cheto mandwa. dakchote shencho sugurwa nganzu lungba yaw nganzu miri yaw nganzu chu yaw kunzu yaw mendo tende sigidwa tugu mendo akang da miki wa chu pangure kyawa chima nyesong ma je lale kye gu na kirang ki cho de ge chembure yinda ya kirang ki cho ki tonda jubala shenda le chawa che cho ma re se na nganzu chen che to gurwa ma je ma to chi o de yinde Dina shiri, tekba chenpu ke malan tekba meba na shinche ya dona digi yora. Inji miji tekba chenpu ke langu mare. Ina tekba chenpu kuwa dabe yo mare. Tekba chenpu ina ko inji miji sanga ke che goya yo mare. Sanga le rimba mangbu yorwa. O sosu che sanme che mena kuwa dabe yo mare. Di mare se ko mare. Mare ite ha kone memba Jusen hakon mo ko tamne lenge basagra o nge tanda ti chigi san so che chen dura ti chidu tagi di kimbari na sui na ti ne tele shenja shira ma je se shenja chenbu che na kyo yung go ra tunge cha yung go ra sawa che go ra pama nyen de da chi bu du de sangmal tsuya ko ne kyo go ra ko dewan de le dunge me de ba re samje kyo go re si go ra ti ina ko zu kanga le tang si go ma ra Sanjay Chumden Dege Koran Pige Shusage Padamata Yabda Yumda Seda Kanga Shani Perva Paya Karesana Tiko Negab de Tawajima, the consul Pusu Pemba de Maris, near consul Ganga Pusu Pemba and that Gures, Tit and Dalla Rantambo, Tindiche Gures, Lapchanagi. Among the American country in the Chazan Lagma.
So, the Buddha taught many different kinds of teachings for a variety of students, and therefore it's not that we have to practice everything, but it's important not to denigrate any of the teachings, to never, what do you say? Sometimes we use the word repudiate, or to abandon, or something like that. To always, be respectful of all the teachings. So that there's the teachings for a person that the higher level of spiritual development, the middle level or intermediate level of spiritual development, the initial level of spiritual development. Like if for the person that. And then there's the tantric teachings, and there's many levels of the tantric teachings and so forth. So, for instance, for a person at the higher level of spiritual development, the person of great capacity, then that person engages in the practices of sort of reorienting themselves from their thinking about their own self-interest and only concentrating on the interests of others. They're trying to fulfill the aims of others, and so that kind of reorientation and the practices for that then are the basis for then entering into the 6 perfections and so forth. These kinds of things are, if they're hard for us to for most of us that we haven't reached that level, so they're hard for us to practice. So then we could practice the those at the intermediate level of spiritual development. The intermediate level then is where you kind of develop a kind of even-mindedness or equal mind towards all beings and see them all as having the same aspirations for happiness and freedom from suffering that you have. So then you see them all in that light, and you don't have any bias or partisanship where you're favoring those who you consider associated with yourself and to the detriment of those who you feel are different from yourself. And so then instead of that, then you have this kind of even-mindedness towards all beings. We are much more not at that kind of spiritual development. We're just sort of thinking, well, oh, he's not from my country, and my country is, the best, or my religion is the best, and we're very partisan in our and biased in our attitudes. So then we can practice the teachings at the initial level. That's where our initial level of spiritual development is, where we then are reassured it's okay to pursue your own interests, but at least don't harm others, and so then we enter into the practices to avoid harm, or practices of non-violence, non-harm. Then, so when it's talking about going into the forest and so forth, the meaning we can take out of this is that we have to be loving and caring towards those who are close to us in the family. It's not that we have to give up our family. It's that we have to give up the attachment that causes us to like I was trying to say before, have a superficial attitude towards our those who are close to us, and then instead of that we develop a deep attitude of caring for others, and then based on that we can live in the the modern world, have a relationship with our families.
Oh yeah, that don't go so that you know. Kimbayina ko le tanje seji ka tubachin getinde yongyoda. Ade so samdan nga titan de togumare samne chinchona sunje samadan de chetogumarwa. Che koya ke yomara. Yina o tende chena ya wishida resam. Tende chengende sozu pamada nyende da tezo kanga le tangne. Kasure tsawa meni cheba membara. Samludan de ta de ngaranzu tungen de nyo de betan tarwache. 다다 파마다 년제 창마 땐도 타베 쉬신게 제국도 삼기어라. 심지어 탐제 때도 중에서 년제도 줄로 담백해지 말아. 네. 년제도 도중아주 다바지 동행된데 뇽대고 당아주 딜레야 파르와지 제국으로 대전당에 깔래 겸나삼. 년제를 학바도 써와잖니 아통게지고 얼마도.
So then we don't have to think of giving up our home or giving up our families and leaving the home and so forth, going to the forest. These kinds of practices as something to reject family and so forth. Actually, you're understanding that you can be more effective to help others if you pursue these goals at whatever level that you can, the level of the teachings that you can. And I was just remembering what Geshe said, like, for instance, the Buddha, when the Buddha gave up his family, it was because the Buddha saw that he could achieve some more ultimate goal that would be of benefit to all beings. So then it's that kind of example that we're following if we're giving up the family and or family life, and we're not really giving it up. We're pursuing a deeper level of care for others.
Oh yeah, what do you do? So lots of talk about Kanga. Sheba Samanga to Chetu Marwa. Oh, you know, to Yabury, Rimbe Bengazo, to the Chetu Cheku, somebody shot to Neagura.
So we can't practice every teaching that the Buddha taught. But when we, if we know our own, ability to practice, if we can't reach that level of practice, then it's good to think of that practice in a positive way and say, oh, that would be wonderful to be able to do like that, and the important thing is certainly never to abandon it or denigrate it or repudiate any teaching.
Chidango Chula, Kimba, Rabjunda, Tinde, Kansaso, Sambata, Teleton, Chumangusung Yora. Then Chimbatan, Chudim, the Sravasti Donazo. Chimbatan, Chudim, Mikichu, with Chudim Suyada. And it's about Cometa, so Kimbal Consum Besido. Chinso Chusum Teda, Pamuch, Devership, Kimbanam Langas, Cares, Kimbako pension to Duchigi Yore, and Midamang Buddha to Duchigure. Shaya Nyanga Yore, Tamashaya Nyanga Yore, Suzula Nyanga Yore, no Napsim meat, Benjol, Napsim, Nursing Chag, Nyanga Mayora. Each do rub the Joko, name Balde, Shidano Mege, Benjon Dungu Shidamajan, to Shida Homara, Nungara. There's a god so Kimbasu Yamli, Checation, but it is a young Nyanga Che or Soda. Tanashi Savacomia. Mambo don't do this, you do the net, the demand non domando contra Tunga Mambo Yongura. And there's also Chibu, the Mambo job manner, Nungara was contra. What is on the so check some denda. And then she rubbed that in the lobby, I did rub the chong, so check where. Rub the chong, I go to the Mambo, then the coach, Yang Tolly, and the non-bachelor subject catchable sonza. There's a little bit to the Mambo and any, come Chanamado, you want to be made in the Sigara. So Tagura. Kanga de Sunsha Chema, so the Karchin chick damje, it's all Janish and that's what me you shagora.
So it's important that we take what we can practice and then keep it and then keep the other practices that we can't reach as kind of like a object of our imagination. Oh, it would be great to do like that, and admiration, something like that. And but when you look at the 6 perfections, for instance, it's really said that the first 3 perfections were for lay persons, because lay persons have a deeper involvement in human society, so that they're constantly, called upon to be careful. For instance, if you consider like ethical discipline, they're called upon to be careful how they speak, for instance, and not to lie or to use divisive speech or offensive speech. That they have to be very careful about that, because there's a lot. If they're going to be, be able to live in society well, they have to follow an ethical discipline, and the same goes for the practice of patience, for instance, and where they have to. Generosity, certainly the idea for them is that there's resources are very important for them, lay persons, and then for patience, then also there's a lot of trouble you can get into in society by having a really bad temper. So if you then have patience and are able to control your anger and hatred and so forth, and intolerance and unforgiveness, all these kinds of qualities, if you're able to do that with cultivating patience, then you'll be able to operate much more, harmoniously in society. So it's the last two perfections that are emphasized for the renunciate, because the teachings are so vast and profound, and so then a person who's a renunciate then should have more time for pursuing meditation and the wisdom practices, and so it's those teachings that are for persons of. That's primarily. You can't say that the other teachings aren't, but primarily for the renunciates, and then so then for just to keep in mind that you always have to have those teachings that you can practice, and then the other teachings you sort of keep them as an object of your aspiration.
Bede tuba nyamle cherwa namda tu nyedu yabushida yora ane ko tepe yabudu samje tanga tende chigis ko chala kanga mebase ko rilindo ane tabu debe te ko baruji de tu mare de tu madu de ko jiba ken mayon o mila reba kora pangore tanga pango se sons tisre sha nyale yare.
Then it's good as an example to hear a good example of how you have to practice those teachings that are accord with your own disposition. There's a I guess we call it a story anyway, that in the Tibetan culture of about Milarepa, where Milarepa was a great yogi who gave up all the any kind of worldly concerns and retreated to a cave and did great engaged in great meditative devotional kind of practices, and so there's this one man who heard this story, and he said, "Oh, that's fantastic." He was a very successful, lay person, but he said, "Oh, I have to do like that." And so he gave up all his resources, all his wealth. He gave it away and went into the cave. He couldn't stay there very long, unfortunately, and was very uncomfortable. And then he lamented, and his lament was, Milarepa lived like a beggar, and now he's made me a beggar. So that's the end of the questions. Oh, is there one under here? Oh, Chichene. Oh, dinang la mendra gana. Di brio ide hagoma so.
Oh yeah.
First I heard that. The Tsikche Tamade, the Rabche Dhammo ki tsikche tama did nga da ngai ki nyambo gola that's sungbarwa gola chik do. We're talking about verse 25 and the beginning there. It talks about, in the teaching today on verse 25, I thought I heard that by meditating on subtle impermanence, we undermine the attachment to I and mine. Tamama de Nishutang Ade, then Gola did. Nga da ngai ge gorla because midak pa tramo gomna dene nga da ngai
mare shologa labda kamro shologa
de
tangni chu nyam semba dirbe
vale de tamade
tama gari tamase
doctor de gana de neson de nga chiyo
tangni chu nyam semba kala ngebar yo ba tene chaba yong darche chidala ya kala jik se dirbe
ne ine de ngana de chu kasa nga da gola ngotu sort of chiyo de gana de la nga da ne dinangla de kasa chakwa de nga da ngayo wala chakwa sort of sigidu then it did midak tramo de nyambo de midak tramo kola yoda be den gimen de
midaba gombe phaye derba ke de now sun draw so yime ki so pe le tane petro janja chen draw re de sigura da ge wala chak ben jigne draw ne gu mare serwa nga sam kangal le tane draw re ane ngai se ngai le da long nye du kanga ti chen draw re te to gu mare sambarwa ane te le kar to da
o ko jena de la da ngai yo de kasa chik la kasa chakwa de midakwa tramo de that's numerous kasa midakwa tramo de nyembo rebe karisena de midakwa tramo la gomna dene de because jiksok la dawa la nyembo droge rebe de nyembo drona dene de kasa kandes kasa midakpa tramo gom tugide yang kandes midakpa tramo kasa dakme dobe sherab la kandes pendobo de midakpa tramo ko driwa drigyo wa midakpa tramo de kande de
kande du said
no de kande dangsen kandes nyembo drogide de kandes gom gode
that is so
consola driga loga
that digde
does
that did midaba tramo kom sona sigora
na de dirwa
midaba tramo kom de ko keji jidwa dan dube tama travel so batende imba samu ya botan sona sigora ane da gi wala ngema na shimbo yong shensa yong mare sigora
na de
samsa da nga karje nga tinde le ta tu mare sam tinde yong yo mare le ta tu gi wara ane ngai sero ngai ne da le da longju nye du la so ba to shane drotu gurevesne oti drotu bachagres wara ja chungru dwane tiwangin dromatu bachigma drotu gures wara o dire ne
so what is being said is here in the verse 25 means that when you consider subtle impermanence and you're thinking about how everything changes from moment to moment and never stays and is in a constant state of flux, then you understand that that's the way the self is. That's the way all other, all other existence or phenomena are. They're subject to this momentariness. Then what that does is it reduces your attachment to yourself and to the the objects of that self, what we would consider mine, the things that we would think of as mine. It reduces attachment to those.
당시 참아 방투 그랬으네 자원에 방투 말해 신자 총을 두래 자원에 방발라 다음에 또 오라
so then when you have that kind of reduction in attachment to yourself and objects that you consider mine, then it's easier for you to then think, oh, I can just go, so you've based that. You've been meditating on coarse and subtle impermanence, and then these two together then reduce one's attachment to oneself and the object and the objects that you would own, and so then. It's the attachment that's being reduced. It doesn't go as a direct antidote to the grasping at self. Okay, the self-grasping or the apprehension of a what do you say, a self that exists from its own side. The only antidote to that is to develop the wisdom that cognizes selflessness.
What is one?
Oh
yeah, 당연히 딜로
so maybe that's
so 대화를 좀 친절로 보내 탑되면서도 고에더니 가서 동해와 임발라야 대화 짐발라 때네 아니 녀모 마부치 끼고 여자 동해와라 대화를 짐배 삼로대 빠에 돈달 쉐기도 와.
So this next chapter is, you can see the meaning if you turn to I think 307 or so this explains how to abandon the erroneous belief in pleasure by meditating on the contaminated body as suffering. That's
this one.
So Yes. So here in this first verse of chapter 2 if we look at page 307, what is being explained here is the necessity of protecting the body from deterioration despite recognizing its suffering nature.
Lily Atene, Saya Koya, Toya Koya, La Soba Tezuku is a Titandal, Penjola Soba Dutrice Guare, Lily never Nangi Nela Soba Mambo, Chi never La Soba Jumata, Chi Shangi, Dumba, the double Soba, Chida Nangi, Neji Mambushi Viziora, Tede Teletan, social Tunga Mambush in Yongiore, Tende Tunga Kangan Junior, the social Ludi Red was some jet, and it Ludi Dia would remember some jet, Ludi Latunjun Cheche. Get to make a some Ludi Bear, soon do have a tendency to marry. Ludi to make it, she done she did it, to get there with Shana, done she did it. The which is a song of race to thank it.
So what's being addressed is that the first line says, although the body is seen like a foe, okay, that the body, if we think about it, is the source of both internal causes of harm and external causes of harm, so we get our illness and difficulties from the body. Okay, it happens to the body, and then also we that externally things can happen to. We can receive harm from objects and so forth that causes much suffering, and so then also just to provide for the body, we have to pursue find a way of supporting ourselves and so forth, so that we can provide for the body, and we undergo a lot of suffering for that. And so then there's a danger of us seeing the body as indeed it's a source of suffering, but then there's a danger of exaggerating it as a foe. So that's what's being addressed here.
This one?
No,
oh yeah, that and that. Lutan book of shares are Midaba to Shagara. And then Ludi Tungakan and Junior Devich schedule some Kone. Or the Ludi Yawish Remedus and Lula Neba, near Shia. Tujarisha, Neba Pangbecheto, and then Ludi Tranashiri, Tungaki, Veshanere. Yes.
So there's a danger also from the first chapter in thinking about impermanence, that because it's subject to impermanence in that way, and there's so much suffering that you undergo from that. Then again, what is it? Nature means like despising. You can sort of look down upon your body or despise your body, something like that, and so that's to be abandoned.
No, yeah. Luni trada tome te dana ya te song jas ludi ya bu song gyu che trading ya bu che go re se lu so ya tanda song gyu ra a kare re se na tumden yurin so ane tele sonam chembu che se lu de le tane mi lu inde ko samlo tang tang da tinde chane ko chudim song ya da chamba chawa ko mela so ba lu de teng ne ko kiwe chawa lab chembu shibu strup tu gyu ra ti inde ti tanda le ya lu de song re se chi da lu gi tunge ma bu ter ki yore de ina ko lu de le tane ko kiwe samlo ning du chembu ma bu ke to gu te lu de ya bu che che song gyu che gu re song gyu re.
So that it says here that although the body is seen like a foe, nevertheless it should be protected. By long sustaining a disciplined body, great merit is created. So even though it's true that the body brings us a lot of difficulty and suffering, nevertheless you have to pursue what we'd say healthy. You have to take care of your health. You have to, have good, healthy habits so that your body is protected, and then in so doing, then you have a great opportunity to what do you say? Accumulate merit through having through having a body that's well kept, right?
Yeah. Condition that they could pay delia to do this door. Then a Songbing Push, Songbing Pushilia, Roba Yabuchi in Bora, Kuma in Bora, Kumache Tujari, the Ine Colia, Roba Yabuchi to Guer, Tisonzaco, Kokumare Tujari, the Ine Cola, Roba Kuguza, Telia. The
example is of a merchant's son who protected a thief to whom he was bound by a close tie. So the merchant's son valued the companionship of this thief, although he knew he was a thief, he always protected him.
Get the Lude and a Sonja in a Yawaja Songuyana, and a good Namela Sobat and Decon, Saya, Toya, Koya, Tasala, Sobat, Yawisha, and a Lulia, Lakbar to Chakba Rigi to us and us,
So if the body is to be protected, one should pamper it with food and clothing. The idea is that the assertion is that we. The thought is, well, if we have to protect it, then I should really prepare, take good care of it and give it a special, give myself special food and really good clothing and a good place to stay and so forth. And it's really I should really be attached to my body. Well.
Lakbar to change Chakbat in the Rigmares, Yora. What they got is a minimum Tunge Luniles. Mitsama Tunge, Junga, call Lulatan Yoguresora. Kivada, Kevada, Nawada, Chivada, Tokbada, Kunjumeva, Tessa Mevat Kanga, so with an Dalchi Mandinico de Yora. Tunge Kanga, the Lulatan Kiyoresera. No, Geshe Yeshe, Tawashan Lulia, Tawanda, but the Chakone, Shanda, Eugene Shanda, Latane, Zani Yongo as it is, Yora. Doishan, Tunga, you know, Yoruba Kokbala, Chidus. When the National Ludico, Tunga Kanga, Jungunta, Yota Kanga, Yonga, Shida, the Korea, Ludel Tani Yongores, Gora. It is on the Cotelia, Shenja Maris, Yabush, Shenja, Chakshin Maris, Ina Ludil, Gogure, Sosolia. Sudim Sunga, Chava Samboya Chetogure, Chava Sambuche at the Ludicore, Sungib trading up with Chegore Sigara, Silent Deva, she was a dark anga could do some tickets and Marisigara.
So what's being said here is that you shouldn't care for it excessively, and that excessive. Sure, the body has to be taken good care of with good habits, healthy habits. But in fact, so the verse says, when human suffering is produced by the body and pleasure by other factors, why are you devoted to this hull, a container of suffering? In fact, our body is the source of most suffering. If you look at it like being born, and then aging, and then sickness and death, and then separating from others, and not getting what you want, and all of these sufferings that we go through are really based on trying to provide for our body and not being, and so the body then is a source of our suffering, but we can't provide for the body in an excessive manner. Oh
yeah. Tende ko tunge changma tamje ne de kyube lu kokban dilas giwara. Lu ji kokban dilia. Sakba do shenji chakba cha ko marese. Yina ya te ane karsore sungyu chen siwara. Ndia te kya tuge da o tende gi chido ane yabuche che ko sungku grese. Akande sungurese na ane ko lu delia koyege Sada Kuda, Nemela Soba to Zukanga, Tunjin and Ludi, Manya Bajako, Soto Bachico, Titan that is
Ludi Sotoba.
Sotoba, somebody
Sotoba. So then, just so we shouldn't be excessively attached to our body, but we have to pursue what it is that the body needs to sustain it. Okay, so we have to have food and clothing and a place to stay. These are the things that the body requires.
Oh yeah, that depends on the Pena Michico, Shinda color stance and drawing better. Do the Langalia, Peme, and Zemach to him better. Alco del tells over the shade. Tinyam de artis and do the Paria Kajan do the Ingiti Shasa Moimber, Shasa Mima into the Imber. I add and do the Zako, Yampeme Delebet, Sebube, and Shanats of Shivers doing the chick lever. Aniko de Shade, Redige Tipa, Severe. Says to Yanti Tumbuni Chadu Ni Chandore, Tinde to Wuni Chandore. This I got to do Yanshi Chandore. And then Namga de Korangi, Bujep and Galashi, Mari Keranti, Dangwip made the pa, Mavis, then the Kanga Mavis, and I got Dangwip made the send Mavis Shara. They do the Kanga Mavis. They peck at us and Blulia, Charles, Shenja, Chetabe Gangi, Kanga Yunguares, Shenja de Churutana. And then you're the Kanga Mavis.
So this is a good example of how you have to. Well, anyway, it's a good example of what's being illustrated here. A man gave a ride in his chariot to an ogress who had showed herself in a beautiful form. A little later on, an ugly ogress appeared ahead. Ogress here is somebody who's going to, like a cannibal, somebody who's going to eat, well, not a cannibal, but somebody who eats humans. So he slashed her with his sharp sword, and there were two. When he also slashed those two, there were four. Then a deity spoke from the sky and saying, if you kill that woman, they'll all be killed. And so he acted accordingly. Here means that kill that woman means the original woman that came into the original ogress really that came into his chariot. So then he killed her, and that destroyed all of them. And so what's being indicated here is that excessive attachment to one's body brings a lot of suffering. So then if you eliminate that excessive attachment to your body, then you'll alleviate. You won't have to undergo a lot of different sufferings.
No, Jondata, Lu Medabada, Dungawa, Comnes, Tata de Lua, Lu Medabada, Dungawa, Comne, and Lula Chagba Pandes, Lagbar to change Chagba de Pande, Lundi Dabu Mahobana, Minjun la Bebe, and it Tungetamje, Mevan Jurgres, that is Sigara, the Michi de Mavasuna, Shandakang Mavat and Dusade. No, the Tadedua.
Yes, Tad. So if you look at what the commentary says, following the example, if by meditating on impermanence and suffering one gets rid of attachment and makes effort to prevent the body from coming into existence, all suffering will end.
This one.
No, this one.
Danyeba Dunge Kumju, Dungawa Lula Sobatu, Dunge Shires, Te Kumju de la Co, Tunde Shegdoa, Tunzen Shegdoa, Tadiban Panchama Yungdoa, that Dangbo da, Dangbo. Lundi Soa Dunge, Sheshe, Sambalani, Tenekara, Tavan Duchi, Dunge Mendoja, Dunge Cheso, Tramwe Chu Sambos, that Tambone, with the Tatiri Tambo. Lundi Soa Dunge, Sheshewa, Samba said that. Lundi Lieutenant Soa Dunge, Shukshambuki, what is some Tambo.
Okay, so the next verse is. starting a section where we're if you look on page 307, explaining extensively how to meditate on suffering, and starts with considering how this body mainly has suffering. So here, the topic is then how is how we mainly undergo suffering through our body because of our body. Well. So the first thought that you might have, or first assertion, although pain occurs only because of the body, since it can be alleviated, it is weak and pleasure greater. Therefore, one does not have to fear pain. Well, that is so.
Oh, that can say, Deva Dunga Darsigdwa, Shesher Mila Mijuna say, Kede say, Deva de Dunga Dar Shechimbu Mila Jungi Mares Gora, Deva de Shukchimbu Jungi Mare, Dunga Jungi say, Kede Deva Dunga Dar Shesher Mila Mijuna say, Tedar Dunga Chimbu de Chungu Nyamdu Semje Tam say. That on the Karsudosana, Kanga Legend, dig the way.
Did Lona?
Legend Sigara, when I dance less over Tessa, Kanga, the net that to the Bekanga, Pusum over Shivis, you have a chair, and then you don't have any, so that you really over Kanga, you have a chair. But the way charging Kanga saw the Yuna Sigara, that Trangu of a so young at the one of which she shoots him, she saw Japsona. The court Deva Kanga the Mab so Shagre Sigara. Or they in the Kira Deva Shukchimbure, Tungeke or Marasik in the Chunju Reset Maris, Tungeti Shuk Chigre Sigara, Tunge Chunju Tindajig, Deva Yuba Charging Kanga, Kibumangas so Shagre Sigara.
So then, when humans do not have as much pleasure as pain, should so much pain be considered negligible as the verse? And the example it gives is of Devadatta, who's experiencing great pleasure in having all his all he needs for his comfort, physical comfort, and what do you say, sensory pleasure. Gathered around him, but while he was experiencing this pleasure, a wasp stung him, and he was immediately miserable. So the idea here is that it's not true that pleasure is so much stronger than pain. It's really that pain overcomes any kind of pleasure.
Tadi Petty Mayor Lotion to the Penasida, Tajoji, Dunga Chamber, Jinsaji Chuma, Trovache, Meji, Dungaji, Tella, Tawachung said Yoba Membe, Mimbatara, Dungaji, Damdu Chimbe Koala, Devar Semba and Tetan Travose. Tajosi did Jagaga Tumshe Chungua, oh, Sri Lanka, Simbu Lanka, the Juchi, the Sita said. Sida said the torch, and it demanded Japji Shidachidua. Tamadiko Sida Trona, Sida the Payang Jaconzipa Trodua. Sakokale Shirajavade, the Tawagachum Maratungima, deep petty Shagdua.
So this is the example is that of Bali stows Sugriva's wife with much difficulty. This is where Sugriva's wife was stolen by Bali. It has to do with the legend of in Sri Lanka, and where where the wife was stolen, and then there was much, what do you say, to get the Sugriva to get his wife back, and for Bali to hold on to his wife. There was much, what do you say, they went to war over the whole thing, so it brought him only suffering and not even a little pleasure. So to think of, and so that's the example of how pain outweighs pleasure. Please, sir. So then, the second part of this, considering how the body mainly has suffering, is in verse 29. If we look at page 307 again, we're considering how suffering follows one, though one wants pleasure and does not want suffering. Right.
동해 중앙라 깔래 첨부게 잡고 말해서 뒤셔도 야완 중앙라 거 배주셔 그래서 동해대 거 중앙라 깔래 잡고 말해서 대화 건바라 메나 메베 동해 나 지리 바다 샤바로 그거부터 당부 데려다 대화 건바라 메나 메베 동해 동해라 지리 바스 대화 건버에 용해야 돼 Teliane, Mabuyona, Teaches or young again, Tunga de la Conjigri Grace, Tishegua.
Yes.
Tilamna?
Did look tired there.
Oh, yeah. Only this young look on the lottery. Tunga debe near Georgiese, Tunga debe near Georgian debe, Tawakalense, Tunga deco, Bezum Evadan deba something junk to Gudese, and then Tawade rang deba something near to Gumarese.
Oh. A chick chase on them. The chick chasing Amade.
Mamma does on Jignet dinner didn't do Jurbe. Close and Niba Ale. Niba Tawan doje Tunge, Mendoja, Tunge chase or Jambe, Sue somebody.
Did one.
Tan Jignet tell a moon shot in Sidwa. Jignet did so, and it Tungelia. Tunge Drubala Mumba Shosh in Sigua. Tunge Drubala Bezusham Chigia Resiguara. When Shoshe. Tinjurda Yaneka Nasi, Yena Tawade, Junia de Niakabu Resiguara. Tungelia Teneco Bezuda Tindice Maguna, Lela Buches, Tenine, Lela Resiguara. Teda Jurja Nieka de Ese. Jigden della Shoshe, Tijurda Yaneka de Ese. Tena Gio and Jigdela, Tunge Cheso Nekbandrase. Tunge de go te Chelia, Sosokeola, Kejiki, Jixi Medaban delia Sigara, and Tunge de Cheso, Rangshinki Cocheso, so near the Yungu Batanda Resuda.
So the verse here is then ordinary people are bent on pleasure. They pursue pleasure. Those who have pleasure are hard to find. Thus it is as if transitory beings are pursued by suffering. And so then, even though we want happiness and don't want suffering, it's as if we're constantly being pursued by suffering.
So Jesu Delium Giores, Jesu Tave, Bangbarka Rese, that Pedelia, Langingebe, Jibatrumbet and Duchine, Da Tarbas and Badandravose. Langing Nimbachi, Dendro Michi, Dendro de Koma, Shandandro Samara Trumba, Nimbachin and the Manju there, Trumba Nimbazu de Tamsa de Zadachil Tam, Zadi, Zawa de Sisi, Rolia to do Yabashe. Oh, today, Yangas, quote the net on a tele to Yatung and Yoga. They don't draw this at the Kongi Ola de Cario. Ola took to do ringbo.
Oh, Duktur. Oh, Duktur. So,
And the Sajin Judy or dear Kotsa, Sisi that in the Sagi or Co. Masaya, the Dimasana, to do Say Yanga or Penelangian, but then the Tana, the Dunga and Shimpajole Dunga Sheba.
So it's the example here is like climbing down a well out of fear of a mad elephant and thinking one is safe. What's not explained here is that at the bottom of the well is a bunch of poisonous snakes. So you're sort of in between two very difficult situations, and then there's no way that you're safe. Well, Teresa.
Yeah, that did it. Why? Niba so chimbo meguba tunge. And Jung Lella the Shagua. Oh, Tambu Tewa La Mena, Mebe Tungela, and Jigrik Banese. Tewa de Combo Telia Mebache Kabuche Chagbache Yore, and Mebe Tene Tungela Jigrik Banese. Tungen Debe Nye Georgiese, Debe Dewakala Yense. Tungeni Tado, and then so the Tanya Buchene. Bezushida Chemagun and Debe Champion to Grace Wara. Near Besse. Dawa Neba Gala in this, Dawa de Conye Lela Mares Wara. Tunge and Lula, a convention, Tunge and Lula de Tawan June Comparese. Church Comba Laquation, Nola Chidi, Kumijis, Takombutelia. Dawa Computela Mercy, Chaction Chet, and the Mela Chidi, Kumiji, Chelian, Tungedelia, Kuchi Miji, the Jibaris was at a shagua.
So, suffering is, in the next one, we're at a section where we're considering how suffering comes easily without the need for great effort. The first verse that covers this is 30. If you see at the top of page 308, it says, if one wishes for rare pleasure, it is appropriate to fear plentiful suffering. So suffering is found, the verse reads, suffering is found at will. But what pleasure is there at will? Why do you value the rare but do not fear the suffering? The plentiful. So if suffering is so plentiful, then it's much more appropriate to what do you say? View it as something undesirable and cultivate an attitude of wanting to be free of suffering. And that comes out in the explanation here. So the analogy then is of someone who breaks into the king's treasury, who has wished suffering on himself and does not gain any happiness. That's the example.
Oh yeah, that the Chagbe Lula Cuba, the Dala Cuba, Tsungba series do Lulia Chakshin Chair, the Dalia Chakshin Chair, and the Chibari series, Cuba Chair, the Chibari series. There Gurva Lubone, Tungenedo, Gurba Dese, Lula Guda, Dalaku, Dedanine, Sumbar Nase. There Gurba, Gurba Lubone, Tungenedo, Gurba Dese, go Tunge, Tunge Rangshinki Mambuyon gets Dese. This on the Tunge, Ludiral, never Chigura, never Chibeshaneco, Danashi Resguara, Lula Cuba, Rala, never Chinga, Dala Cubani, Sumbatabu Nangse.
So then the verse here, valuing the body out of attachment is like valuing a foe. So the verse reads, a comfortable body is a container of suffering. Thus valuing the body is like valuing a foe. both seem alike. So we're talking about our body is just a container for much suffering, so to value it then is just like valuing a foe. So the body and the foe are both alike in the sense that they both bring us great suffering.
Prism Soba, Kangba Wuda, Tindina, which is science, and it's Jamako Kibushida Cheche, and the co Chima Co Niesa, Yunga teaching to Yorba, teaching you to watch you now come Medeva Cheche, me give a shout your this one. Oh, this one.
Yes, this one. So the analogy is a king saw a man asleep in a chariot in the noonday heat. Feeling pity, he took care of him, with the result that later even the touch of a mustard seed prevented the man from sleeping. So the idea is that more one indulges in comfort, the more suffering it provokes.
This one. Those Mandina Namsa, Kibumeva, Nacho, Techo, Ambona Kokale, Jabje, Bena Mikale, Jabko to Shingata, Pajet, Sushi, Kale Jamgeto, Shiran, Nayes Midwa. Kibuji dead and getting image Shingana, Lega Chechuna, could never try to do. What is in the Sierra?
So the example is really of it's comparing. How if we indulge the body and giving it much comfort, then even the smallest difficulty becomes unbearable. Whereas if we maintain our life with undergoing many difficulties, and then we are free of having that sort of extra suffering. For instance, if we're planting the field at the end of the day of working in the field, your body is just tired. It's not like you're adding more. It's not like the body becomes more sensitive to suffering.
Lu Tungaji Rangshin Mandebar Samba said it. Lu de Co Tungaji Rangshin Le Mandebar Tungaji Rangshin Chanchire. The Indico Devaji Rangshin Chanchilipa, but the Gurjutanake Homares, the Shegua. Lu Nation don't go again, the way out to Minjurtese, the way down to Jurgimares. Rangshin Changes in Lu Korang, Tungaji Rangshin Chansonza, Tungate Rangshin Chansonza. And Shandaji ko Tungater Rangshin in the city none, the one by she gave then the cure to Gumares, Rangshin Shanji Sinu, showered by my nose.
So consider this next section, this next verse is, if we look at what it's in the outline, how the outline describes what it's about. On page 308 it says, considering how the body does not transcend its suffering nature. So the body, however long one spends, will not in itself become pleasurable. To say its nature can be overruled by other factors is improper. So we can't really do anything to the body to do anything means to accumulate various causes and conditions so that it would somehow go beyond its nature of suffering.
No, that's a pedal. Then Kuyu, Yakura, Kuyu. Kuyu, the Bugatti, Jason, Kuyu, Massive Charo to the Sochu Visera. Charo, the Chambuchas on it. Charo server the Yanko, Kuyuki re, Rugurmado, Charo Rig Maris, what or didn't she lose the bear, the very ranking of Jigangazu, Kaza Bezu Chabina, could the very ranking drag your mother to make a shisha gentle race.
So the example is just like a mother crow nurturing a cuckoo fledgling in its nest, that the cuckoo will never become a crow. So just no matter how much we do for our body, you're never going to be able to change its nature of suffering.
This one, Shiva did that. Tunge number children, Kede Tunge number children should Shiva did that. Kede Jerry la so by Kene, Mashiba the Soa Deva Corner. Dembe Tonga, Dungeji Ranshi, Imba Miriso, Shenase. Kede Jerry La Soba, Mashiba do Tewakona, the Dembe Tonga, Dungeji Ranshi, Imba Miritatis, Yora, Kevi Rigrabitin, Chukuship in the Kesone. Anako, Lube, the Ranshi Tegdo, Kebuja Saya, Tuya, Koya, Chikaya, Toya, the Kage Maveshe, and the Ranshi Tegdo Ase, Sigdua. Oh, Tenukasre, Kirilla Soba Kene. Mashiba to Tawakona Mado, Damba Tonga, Tungeji Ranshi, Yimba Miriso, Sena, or Timare, Tungeji Ranshi, Segua.
Yes. So this next one is verse 33 is in the outline says, considering how suffering causes harm. And here the thought or the objection here is its nature cannot be suffering, for those of royal caste and so forth have nothing but pleasurable feelings from birth to death. So the idea is that you can think of somebody who has all they need physically, whether for their food and clothing and a place to stay and only the best, must always be feeling pleasure, but that's not the case.
Oh yeah, the chola yiji tunge desa, o jabula soba, penjo kuchane tungi changma zom denge yona, kokole asemji tunge manga yores gora. Karesne, sosu penjo de nyama yungesam, jebo shenda to the penjo shimbo dona tele chado cheada, kobe samlu mabuche semji tunge de manga res gora. Chola yiji tunge desa. Tame namla luji so ta sego tome kyobo yenge solia lule kebe chakba ta tokba ta chi nana me balo soba te tunge nyagi ore so wara tunge ni jin jikden de nyiri jombar chesde chubu yenanda kyobo yenanda tunge ni gal yor ma de chubu tunge me tende marese lucho namla go chingi ba se sigdo go mangbu kaje chala de chi le mangbu shebi chene te sam ye semde da sembe me gi ba manga yung gyara tunge me ba chi wa mare semji tunge manga de chi de le luji tunge yung gyara.
So then here the verse states the high have mental suffering. For the common it comes from the body. Day by day both kinds of suffering overwhelm people in the world. So it's not that the high are those who are very well off in terms of their like nowadays who are very wealthy and have everything they need to support themselves physically, all their physical needs are free of suffering. That they have to worry about keeping their wealth and then maintaining their wealth, and then they're jealous of those who have more wealth, and there's all sorts of mental suffering. It's very much unlike those who don't have such physical comforts, but have the usual pains of their body that from what do you say, working hard work and from walking long distances and undergoing much physical strain and so forth. And so, do so.
No, da pete ci lamne dua. Bene gebo gi langbushi tulchuche. Chidi yakbuche tulshembe sheko gebo gi yakbuche chungche. Chidi roba shanda ko chado che yime de wa ke ada ani me she ba che de lang je tu ni tu ma tu ni ke bo ge le cheba da tinde serch do
so the analogy is a king was pleased with an expert trainer who managed to ride a difficult elephant. Seeing this, the elephant keeper felt uneasy, or another man without expertise was punished by the king, which caused him physical suffering. The uneasiness is just sort of like he had feelings of jealousy and so forth, mental uneasiness. Oh, is it time for questions? Or?
Well, maybe I need some clarification. We spent an hour in the beginning with questions, and then Geshe started at 3:30 teaching, so we cut it off, and he only teaches for half an hour. So
yeah.
I'll let you know. But
what is it now, 4? Quarter after 4. Dutse that's yode.
Oh yeah.
Dan genna de kasa tikche la dutse mangbo rang kasa tikche sheya la dutse mangbo rang yo marawat dutse gona dene kande de. That's a tikche ge chin sadaro. Then no, there's time for questions if people had any questions at this point. Yeah, then if there aren't any questions, then we can go ahead. But, anything that...
Many of us would like to have more teachings rather than somebody
yeah.
Seems like the questions are coming the day people are thinking about it for the evening meditation, and the questions come up the following day from the teachings. So we're thinking about it.
Says samla danda gena suna drigidus that konse samla dangyo de jaila then it driva de kala yongere. Kansa doctor de kala yongere.
That did do song and you chole don't. Don't ngaba de redwa. Ngaba de. Tunge che top dan demba samba sigdwa. Tunge de che top dan demba res tewa de nyu res top chunju res de samgdwa. Ke de tunge ni yeme yes tunge samji tunge da luji tunge ni yore. Ro yeme je. De dana ya tewa chembe sije nembe meshe so se ina tewa chembo yona ane tunge de sije nendu ke shida tunge yeba ke a ko mare sigdwa shida se. Oh, the Mares, the Shagdwa. Oh, Tawa Tokbe Wang Jurchese. And the teacher lab and got him go to Chilapshan.
So then the outline describes this verse as dealing with considering how powerful pain is. And so then the thought here, or the assertion, is that though these two kinds of sufferings exist, one does not notice them because great pleasure makes them insignificant. You can't even feel the pain because of pleasure being so great. Well,
this one. Oh, the Tawa Tokbe Wang Jurjesigwa. Tawa de Tunge de Pasik, no took Maresigora. Then the Tama de Tawa de Tunge to the Tawa Chamber unit, Tunge de Sigin Gracia Lapsuma. Sigin and Betunge in Baket, so took Medos and Nasigora. Oh, Tawa Tokbe Wang Jurjes and the Mare Tawa de Sosoge, the Samlotaya want to Jurgareswara. Tawa Tokbe on you. Talk about the Tunge Wang Jube, talk about the Tunge Shawan to Jurgareswara. Teacher Kuna Tungele, Shindu Tom de Chiamesa. Tawa the Tunge Nigan, Tunge the top chigrese. Tawa top shin, Tunge Sigina to be on Maresa. Caresne, Tawa de Samlotandange, Utogbe want to Jurgerese. Talk about the Tunge want to Jurgerese. No, teacher Kuna Tungele, Shindu Tom de Chiamese. Tunge that and the Carso Tunge Sigino Nebe, Tawa Chambu Mares, your Maris Cars to Tawane, and Tunge want to Gurbe Togwala Rale Grace. Tawade, Tunge want to give a Togwala Rale and Kegurese. Tedar Dane Tom Penas and de Wodil Pechagua. Not Chimbaton Aboyin, some Chubuchi Chimba Mambutana, not Chimbaton Aboyin, Yambe, ene soje se yiji dewan junes ko dambu ka yung gore me kange kusha jo ko chimbashira tang yores daina ko yangja samlustan tanga besha da te kachin so so ne nur dure sambene ya ko yime te wa ki yores yara jorba yo nya kinche ji to ne nyam dure samne togbe yiji dewa dogbar gyurwase te ये मेदेवा दे चाओ ने देता चो दुगरे संबेबरे दुगरे सामने ये मेदेवा दे देवा दन दो दुगरे वाले सवारा सा देवा के वादा गाबाने तोबे वां दु जुरचे से देवा के वादे तगे चिंबा ता दे गा तोआ पोरे समसु समला का बचोरा के जरा हो ता ये ने दे का को चो दु में ये समझ दे या को दुंगे देवा दे मैं बचारवा ऐसा को देवा दे दे वां दु जो तोबे वां दु जो वाले से जुरचे से देवे dübe tokba tungege jombease teve dübe tokba de tunge de jomge ware o tanga de nyam dugure sam tunge chudu dage nga tonga bu yin sam be tewa de me chandu ro tungege wang do gyurba de sher jigne kun la tunge le shindo top dan dembe choa chi ame do so dire
so here the verse goes pleasure is governed by thoughts, and we actually had something along these lines in a previous verse where we talked about Devadatta being in great comfort and being stung by a bee, so then or a wasp, and so that immediately he was miserable. So it's clear that suffering overpowers pleasure, but still coming back with a thought that pleasure could somehow overpower the suffering. So here, pleasure is governed by thoughts. Thoughts are governed by pain. Thus, there is nothing anywhere more powerful than pain. So the example here, it's talking about how pleasure is always governed by thoughts, and then the thoughts themselves are governed by pain. So then then pain is always going to be more significant than pleasure. So the example here helps, because when one thinks of oneself as a benefactor, say, I'm such a great philanthropist and so forth, very proudly thinking mental pleasure arises, but then that pleasure is instantly stopped by the fear that though one has wealth, it might come to an end. So immediately you are brought to an unhappy state. So the arising and cessation of pleasure are governed by thoughts. You're just thinking like that, right? And then, since pleasurable thoughts are destroyed by pain, they are governed by pain. Wow.
Nama Kembashi da Chungashi Niu Sarava, Chongbachilia, Puchil Kimeni Yuvache, Tambu Yongashi da Chema Yongashi Nibashara, and Nema Yonga delia, Puchicha, Chema Yonga de Puchi Puni Yoera, and Nema Yonga the Puti Shindra in Bere. Or Shindra do it, and Chema Yonga put it that day or what? Delia de then teach you, Mungu Yore, Midunguni. Tankana Shisani Tende Yurumudosare, Tanguni Karchik by some day matches. Marina Pushi while some day she may say. Nazu Namasabaki, Buddhi Yabuche, Temptation Yabuche, you said some day only. Oh, didn't she is?
So the example is of two wives, a senior and a junior one. Senior just means that she was the first wife, and then the junior wife came later on. The one suffered more about seeing the other's son being shown respect than about the death of her own. So when the senior wife saw the junior wife's son being decked out and shown respect, she cried bitterly. When asked what was the use of crying about her dead son, she answered that she was not crying about him, but about the junior wife's living one. So suffering is like that. The mental suffering is brought on like that.
This one.
No.
Yeah, that is Luna. Tuba, Sora, Deva Luigi, Jumbo Tabimbas. So Deva de Luigi Casore, Jumbo Tabimbas. Deva Nekaya, never Mechibes, Luigi Ranshinas. So Deva the Tungani Orva. So Luigi saw Deva de. And they call Luigi, Lulia, the social pambachi user, and then Luigi Casore, Ranshin Double Sigara. Tungedi, social lute and some never chicky user, called Negaban, Jumbo Dabushi, Mishanda Nation Rese, or the other social dog when they Ranshin of Tanya, which Tungedi called Mishanda Nation, Luburan, which is some Giora. What in the race and the Timares, Tisha.
So considering how this next verse 35 then is considering how the pleasure of the sensation of pleasure is like a visitor to the body. Although the thought then or the assertion is although pleasure is hard to find, it does no harm. It's like a friend, we can say. But since pain harms, it is as if alien to the body. So so pain is something that it's other and we don't like. So then it seems like it's alien. But this is not so.
Dungedi and so get Carsore, Luigi, Rangshin Double Resiguara. Paras Chida Tundu as a Tambo de Sendi Chiba Jet, and Shunu Jet, and Tala Baba, Kabala Soba, Chida Tundu Atedar, Kaba so you don't pay to your Desora. This on the Tunge Pelase. Tella Jabne, Chero teacher, Tewa Luigi, Shambo, Shambo Shade. Shambo Share, some Cheben Jumbo Tabur, no Geshe Yeshe. Oh, this is what. And that day, and Tunedico, Messeria, Pel, and Dodeguase. This is the Luigi Ranshin Tabuchi de Odessa. Jumbo Tanya Butabuche. The other couple Mato Yomare, Timazako, Luigi Shantabuchi. So
it's quite the opposite. So when
Luigi Ranshin is Tanya Pengito Ase. Tungedi Luigi Shambudabure, Shandatabures, Kongaranzures, Chibuti Shandavares, that Dimares.
So the person is thinking that this is, pleasure is like a friend, it's one of us or something like that, and then because suffering is not pleasant. It's like it's other and some alien. So but with the verse here it says quite the opposite. With the passage of time, pain increases. Pleasure therefore seems as if alien to this body. So it's for instance, in our youth, then it seems that we might have the thought that pleasure is somehow just part of our physical experience, and with the passage of time, as childhood to youth and then to maturity and old age, it's suffering that increases and pleasure that vanishes. And so then it's pleasure because because pleasure is only visiting us for a short time, it seems that it's really pleasure that's alien to the body.
다들 배드 로션 배드 배나 람타른 무슨 중에 미나 당에 멜로스전 사이에 통해 저기 아니 깔에 카르 누구여라 람자 세바다 등에 배워시노스 베레샤 아니 배지 두줄 좀에도 저도에
Zogduga. So it's like a traveler on the example illustrates this. A traveler on a long journey whose suffering increases as it grows tired and runs out of provisions. So the time is up, and we'll leave it at that verse.
뭐야?